The things that lead to where you want to go don't resemble where you want to go. Sometimes the best way to get to somewhere interesting is to not be trying to get there. Setting an objective can actually get in the way of achievement or block you from doing something significant.
I'm very excited to be here with Kenneth Stanley. Honestly, guys, you need to watch this podcast. This will change. It changed my life, this human that you see here. And I'm sure it will help you with your goals and everything. So, Kenneth, who are you? Explain to the audience.
Well, my primary background has been in artificial intelligence research. I was in particular interested in an area called open-endedness, which has to do with basically creative systems that continually produce interesting stuff for as long as you run them. I've had a pretty diverse career. I've been a professor for some time. I worked in industry. I sold a company. I was leading a team at OpenAI recently as well. I also wrote a book, which I think is really what we'll talk about the most, is called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. And that was about a lesson that I learned originally from AI research, but that extended out to basically all of society and culture and the way we run our institutions and things like that. And I can get into it more, but I guess I'll let Phidias lead the way.
So I just want to rephrase that. You changed my worldview about success, and also, so guys, this guy is the real deal. He understands artificial intelligence. He worked in OpenAI. He did really cool things in his life. So you need to stay and watch at least 20 minutes of the podcast to understand his theory. So let's get into. So I want you to explain me why you think you revolutionized my way of thinking about success. What do you think?
Why I revolutionized your way of thinking about success? Well, yes. I could guess why. I think it has to do with the book, Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. And so to give a little bit of context on what that book is about, the main idea is that setting an objective, which everybody does and everybody thinks of as just like a regular routine thing that we do, we set objectives. But the idea in the book is that setting an objective can actually get in the way of achievement or block you from doing something significant, stop you from being innovative. Lots of bad things can happen when you set an objective. And we give a lot of reasons for that. And it originates with AI research, actually, is where this insight originally started. But without getting too much into the reasons for it, if you just kind of think for a second about what that means, just think about the fact that objectives are ubiquitous across our entire culture. You personally have objectives. Your company gives you objectives. Your university has objectives, like your major. Your educational system has objectives like tests. Like everything around us is all in terms of objectives. If you want money for anything, you want to start a company, you want to get research done, you want to do anything interesting, people will ask you, well, what is your objective? What are you going to deliver? Now, if what I'm saying here is right, and we'll get into that probably, why I would think this is correct, but just think about this. If it's correct that having an objective can block you from really blue sky discovery or innovation, then all of this stuff is problematic and is actually causing us to do less rather than more. And of course, that applies to our personal lives as well, because a lot of us have big objectives for ourselves, career-wise, maybe money-wise, other ways, relationship-wise, and it would apply there too. So it could potentially rearrange how you think about success when you think about how it affects you personally as well.
So let's get into the origin of how do you discover this and what, because the thing is with you is that you don't just say things, motivational speaker or something. You actually you're a scientist, did this, they have proved this with some experiments and stuff. So explain to me how you found this.
Right. Yeah. And that's an important point. Yeah. This is not motivational
speaking. Very important point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Because, at first it sounds like a self-help kind of book or something. Like, it's like, okay, well, don't set objectives. You'll be more successful. Go out and pursue your interests. Like, don't worry about where you're going. It's very kind of new age, sounds like a new age, fluffy kind of thing. But that's what's interesting about it, is that I don't come from that at all. Like, I'm not like a new age type of philosopher or out here trying to do self-help. I mean, I was just doing AI research, like hardcore AI research. So I was just a scientific researcher. But the thing was that we discovered this thing in algorithms, not with people and institutions, with algorithms, because in the field of AI and machine learning, we want algorithms to be able to make discoveries and solve problems, of course. And so there's an idea in machine learning that in order to get an algorithm, like a learning algorithm, something that can make the computer learn, to be able to solve a problem, you have to define the objective. And then what the computer tries to do, it tries to move its abilities towards that objective. We call it following the gradient towards the objective. And then you get to the objective and it's over. If you got there, then you celebrate and say, well, it solved that problem. Like the robot learned to walk or something like that. It's solved. Or it doesn't. It gets stuck. And then you say, it's also over. It's just that we won't celebrate because it didn't work. And this is very traditional. But, I was interested in algorithms that aren't like trying to get to a certain point, but rather that keep producing interesting stuff forever. And this may sound very abstract, because we're getting away now from like society and institutions and things. But basically what that means is I was thinking about things like evolution and like civilization. Like civilization as a whole, like you think about all of human civilization, there's not like one objective that we're all working towards. Rather, like each one of us is doing something different and we're actually diverging. Like we're going outwards in many different directions and paths all simultaneously. And that causes us to go from things like, fire and wheels early on to things like space stations and computers now. And that's a huge progression over thousands of years. And of course, evolution is also like this. It's evolution going from like single-celled organisms to like all of life on Earth. And that's also a very large divergent progression, which does not have a final objective. It's not like humans are the objective. And I was just trying to understand how to get computers to do stuff like that, which is very ambitious. But I was thinking like, it's not like I want to just, recreate civilization on a computer, but if a computer could be creative in that way, like just find all the interesting opportunities that exist and then make them happen. Like that would be incredibly powerful from a creative perspective. And I've always been interested in creativity. And so we were doing experiments along those lines. But you see, there's this one problem with open-ended systems in computers is that we don't know how to do it yet. We don't know how to make the computer do stuff like civilization. That's like a holy grail at the level of AI or something like that. So short of that, one thing that you can do is you can put humans in the loop. Like in an experimental system, we like try to get people to discover new stuff with the computer as kind of a partner. And the reason that it makes sense to partner humans and computers in a system like this is because we kind of cheating. Humans do have that creative ability. Obviously, because we're responsible for civilization. So we tend to actually diverge and pursue different paths of exploration. And so while we don't totally know how to get a computer to do this, we can get a human to work with a computer in some creative space to do this kind of search. And so what we did, though, is we said, let's then have the human search in space of pictures, because it just seemed like an easy domain to actually observe how an open-ended discovery process would unfold. You see, because you can look at the pictures and then you can see what was discovered, and it's very easy and very fast. It's not like you have to spend 10 minutes looking at the picture to understand what happened. Just look at the picture. It's cool or it's not cool. The thing was that, back then you have to remember this.
But by the way, when you are talking, because I saw the pictures, they are amazing, and the evolution of the picture, we're going to put some pictures on the screen while you're describing so you can point out and we're going to show the pictures.
Perfect. Great. That's great. Yeah. And just for the audience, I would note that this is more than 10 years ago. So the modern image generators that you're used to, like DALL-E or Stable Diffusion, if you've heard of these things, like they didn't exist. This is long before that technology. So this is a completely different thing. This is a world where what was happening was that people were actually breeding pictures. And so it was like breeding dogs or breeding horses or something like that. Like if you saw a picture of a butterfly and you chose it to have children, it would have slightly different butterflies as children. And so usually like this would start with just blobs. So you're just looking at blobs and then you choose a blob and it has children and they look a little bit like the blob, but just like if you had kids, they wouldn't look exactly like you. its children don't look exactly like it. And you can just breed generation after generation after generation. And the point is, it's a proxy for a discovery process. I mean, it's not like there's a utility in and of itself of like just evolving pictures. But what it gives us is this giant artifact of all the discoveries that were ever made over the history of the run. Basically, a tree of life evolves because of all these people. There were several hundred, ultimately thousands, a couple thousand people came in to the Pickbreeder system who were breeding, and they could breed off each other's discoveries. So like if I discovered something, like if I discovered, like a skull, then somebody could take that skull and then breed it further to get something else. And so this tree of life was basically growing in the system, what biologists might call a phylogeny. It looks like the kind of tree of life images you see of evolution. And for us, like
So that you consider that as selective breeding, or like is pure randomized breeding?
Mm-hmm. So it's a combination of randomness and selection. Like, to make it clear, what's random are the mutations. So like if you choose a parent, it could have children, and like the DNA, if you will, it's not really DNA, but the kind of artificial DNA that's inside of that parent would be perturbed randomly. We'd flip a few genes. So this child would be slightly different. That's random. But then the selection of which child you want to breed further, that's not random, because that's chosen by a human. And so the human it's important to emphasize a very non-random element here, because that's actually based on what's interesting. And so we're using human intelligence to decide which image should be the parent of the next generation. So there's a name for combinations of non-random and random. It's called stochastic. So you call it a stochastic process, overall. And so I just want to make it clear, because like saying it's random is very misleading, because it sort of implies that like the only way to do interesting stuff is to be random, which is not a good lesson, because like if we were all just random, we would accomplish almost nothing. So we don't want to think about it that way. We're actually
you chose the people that they did breeding. They chose the things that they thought that they're interesting together. So this is
they would choose things that they thought were interesting. It doesn't have to be together. I think would mean like they would like two parents and then a child, but we could have one parent in this system. So you might call it asexual reproduction. I mean, this is not really having sex, but it's asexual reproduction. You could also have two parents. It doesn't matter, because it's all artificial. So a lot of time people just choose one parent. And, that doesn't happen with humans, but some organisms will be asexual, reproduce asexually. So Pickbreeder allowed that. And yeah, you're just saying, give me some things, give me children from this. And it could do that because there's like an artificial DNA under the hood. And so the point though, like if you're thinking, well, there's all these people breeding pictures and tree of life, like what's the point of all of this? The point is, after all is said and done, we would have this tree of life, and we could see an actual open-ended system as an artifact, how it had unfolded. We can see every single step of the way. It's like if we could see every single organism in the tree of life. We can't. I mean, that's why there's like paleontologists going out and digging holes in the ground. Like it's really hard to get the history of every single thing that happened in the history of life. Pickbreeder, though, because we created it's artificial, we know every single step, every single mutation that ever happened, every single selection that ever happened. And the reason that I thought this would be valuable is because it might give us insight to understand how open-ended systems work, because I want to create artificial ones. So seeing a real one like as an artifact, like seemed like it's like a lot of useful data. And it turned out that it was really useful, because this insight that we discovered from that data, which is getting now to the answer to your question, what we discovered when we looked at the data, which means we were looking at the pictures that people had bred, and they were really impressive when you consider that they were evolved from blobs. I mean, we had butterflies, we had skulls, we had even a car, all kinds of things that were easily recognizable. But you have to understand, they're not created by artists. They're not created by image generators where you type in a sentence and it just puts the thing out there you want. They were bred from blobs with random mutation. And the vast majority of the space of things you could breed are just garbage blobs. Like this is like extreme needles in a haystack. And yet people were finding them over and over and over again. And the question is why and how? Because I think the answer to that question, at least I believed, is part of the answer to why open-ended processes are so powerful in the first place, or how they work. how does a process like evolution or a process like civilization actually continually, consistently produce interesting stuff? What is causing that to happen? Well, the answer lies in the data of Pickbreeder. And we found something that I thought was totally shocking when we looked at this data. And it wasn't something I was expecting, which was that when we looked at the history of how every interesting discovery was discovered in the system, because remember, we can see all the steps that led up to everything. The history always told the same story, and the story always was that the people who discovered the stepping stones that led to that discovery were not looking for that discovery. So the people who look for those, the people, let me say that again, the people who selected those stepping stones were not looking for the ultimate discovery. Now, I just want to add one other quick thing, because you may think, well, how would I know what they're looking for? Because the reason that we know is because we could look at the stepping stones and see, because it's all pictures, and they don't look anything like the final products. There were like completely crazy things. Like there was an alien face that led to a car. In hindsight, you could tell because the eyes of the alien actually slowly drifted down and became wheels. But no one would ever think that going forward. Like if you wanted a car, you wouldn't select an alien face. And this story was repeated again and again and again. And it totally blew my mind, because I was like, everything I'd ever been taught, because I come from an engineering, computer science background, everything I'd ever been taught was that you set your objective and then you move towards that objective. And that's how we accomplish things in life, in this world. There's all kinds of names for it, like top-down design, bottom-up design, following the gradient, like whatever you want to call it. There's different words, but you know where you're going and you move there intentionally. And we celebrate that as a culture. Like that's like, we really respect people who are like, don't give up and are persistent and they just move towards their objective. They won't stop. And it's just like, that's what I believed in. But every single interesting discovery on this system told a completely opposite story, which is that if you were trying to find something, you would never get it. The only way to find things was by not looking for them.
So can you give me an example of how does that translate to real life?
Yeah. So this is, of course, a big leap, right? Because and at the time, like we weren't thinking about real life. We were looking at Pickbreeder as an artificial system that might inform algorithms we might design. But what you have to think about for a second is there's this property that we're observing in this open-ended system, which is that to get to certain things, like say a butterfly, you have to not be looking for a butterfly. So what were people doing then? So what does that mean? Like what were people actually doing? So if they weren't looking for the butterfly, then how did they get it? Well, what people were doing was they were choosing things simply because they like those things in the moment, or they found them interesting. For example, if you discovered symmetry, well, it's just appealing because people like symmetry. The human visual system responds to symmetry. It's pretty. We don't know it's going to lead to a butterfly, but it happens that is a stepping stone to a butterfly, the discovery of symmetry itself. And so people are discovering things by choosing what's interesting to them in the moment without worrying where it's going. Now, the thing that is pretty obvious that follows from that is that you at least would have to ask the question is, does the real world work that way? There are things that I want to achieve. They're far off. What are the stepping stones that I need to traverse to get to those things? So think about something like, I want to make a fundamental scientific discovery, or I want to make $1 billion, or just some kind of really ambitious thing. And I want to be clear that I'm talking about ambitious kinds of discoveries or innovations or achievements, not modest ones. Modest ones, nothing I'm saying applies. You can achieve modest things as objectives. It's a caveat, and it's an important one. So it's like, do you want to get a degree in accounting, for example? Well, it's been done like millions of times before. Like we know what I'm not saying it's easy necessarily, but we know what the stepping stones are. You go to college, you select that major, you work hard, like you can probably do it. That's perfectly fine. I'm talking about things that are unprecedented, that haven't been done before, that we don't know how to do. So something like, making a major scientific breakthrough, starting a company that changes the world in some way, like making $1 billion, like these kinds of things are the kind of things you can't just like major in something and then that just comes out of it. Like the stepping stones are unknown. And that's true of the butterfly and Pickbreeder too. The stepping stones are unknown. And, in all complex spaces, there's this property called deception, which means that the things that lead to where you want to go don't resemble where you want to go. Gets to why this is applicable in the real world and not only in something like Pickbreeder. And if you think about this is a very important point, this point of deception, because it's just totally intuitive once you think about it. At first, it's counterintuitive, but when you think about it, of course, it's intuitive. Because think about it. If we knew what the stepping stones were, we would just follow them. Like if the stepping stone to curing cancer looked like curing cancer, then we would know what the stepping stone is. Because we know what curing cancer looks like, we would just do it. But we don't know how to do it because we don't know what the stepping stones are. That's the whole problem that we're facing. And so we are left in this completely mist-cloaked lake where we can't see two stepping stones ahead. We only know what's right in front of us, and we don't know which ones to take to get to these destinations, which we hope to get to. And that is not just a problem in Pickbreeder. That is basically the situation of all of life. That's just the situation of being alive in this world, the complex universe, is that the world is deceptive. That's why we're so impressed when somebody does achieve something like this, because we realize that it must have been a circuitous path. It must have been complex. How could they have figured this out? But it's just like asking, how did somebody figure out the stepping stones to the butterfly? Well, the answer is they weren't trying to get a butterfly. So why would it be any different in the real world when we don't know what the stepping stones are? It would not be different because it's actually a more complex space than Pickbreeder. Underneath the hood of those images, there's maybe a few dozen or maybe at most a few hundred hidden parameters, like behind the butterfly. There might be like a couple hundred parameters that describe it. You don't have to see them because they're the kind of artificial DNA behind the scenes, but they're lurking behind it. But in the real world, there's millions, billions, trillions of parameters, like all the things that have an impact on life and the way that the universe works. It's incomprehensibly complex. So it's actually maybe worse than Pickbreeder in terms of the circuitous nature of the stepping stones that would get you to where you want to go. And so indeed, a very important lesson is that sometimes the best way to get to somewhere interesting is to not be trying to get there, which is not to say it's random. It's to say that you can follow interesting stepping stones without knowing where they're going, which is what the Pickbreeder users who were successful did. I chose the symmetric image because it was symmetric, not because I know where it's going, because I think symmetry opens up potential. We have a nose for the interesting. We have a nose for potential as human beings. And so this is something that we can do.
So you can't imagine how excited I was when you accepted the podcast invitation, because you literally changed kind of my worldview on this stuff. And I applied this theory to my life. And I want to give you an example and tell me what if this is exactly what the theory is saying. For example, I have now a lot of millions of subscribers on YouTube, on my main channel. And my goal before I started watching your stuff was to, let's put a goal. It's obvious to put 100 million subscribers as a goal. Like, we're going to work towards that. It's probably unachievable because there is another person that achieved it. And let's work towards that. But then I saw your stuff and I was like, oh my God, am I limiting myself to when I put that goal? Like, maybe I will eliminate all the other paths that I was going to go and create innovation in so many other paths. Or maybe it's, but with your way of thinking, it's I increase my chances of creating something new when I'm doing this way. So I changed my mindset and I'm like, okay, there is no goals. Even with my team that they are asking, because they are programmed like, oh, let's put a subscriber goal this month. Let's put a view goal this month. So I said, no, guys. So we only do what is interesting. And I started this podcast because of this thought that I had, because if it was obvious for me to not do podcasting, because that will not help me with my main channel videos that is entertainment to do, but because I follow the path that is interesting to me at the moment, I started this podcast because of this, because it's not efficient if you think about it, but it's fun for me now. So I don't know. I wanted to ask you if this is the essence of what this says.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's very gratifying to hear the story. I think it's completely the essence of the spirit of the book. It's yeah, I think, to say, let's just forget about these metrics, like, how many followers this week, how many subscribers this month or whatever, just say, let's just do things that are interesting. It's certainly, with the spirit of the philosophy of the book. And I just wanted to say about that, like, what if you do make a move like that, which you did successfully, and congratulations on the subscriber count. That's awesome. You have to understand that it's about risk, right? Because it's not my book or my message is not to say that, like, I'm guaranteeing you that if you just do things that are interesting, suddenly you're going to have millions of subscribers. Like, there's no guarantee about anything. But the point is, if you don't do this, you won't have millions of subscribers. You won't do anything that interesting. It's just that you have to understand that if you do this, you're taking a risk. And so risk is, like, inherent in everything that I'm saying. Like, doing things that are interesting does not guarantee payoff. It just means it's just that if you don't do things that are interesting, then you probably won't get a big payoff. Now, you can get modest payoffs. Like I said, like, you can do things that are modest and they probably will work. Like, you can make a living and support yourself probably without following my advice. Because
yes,
you don't
but doing modest things is boring. So for people that are ambitions and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's boring, but it's. I just wanted to make the distinction that.
Yes, it's very important. I agree with you. We need to say, and with me, I was not going to blame you if suddenly, because if this will take me to a different direction and I become a monk or something, like, I was not. You don't know. So there is risk involved in everything. But, like, if you optimize, let's say, for innovation and creating something new, I think with your way, it's increasing the possibilities of doing that.
Yeah, for sure. That's the point. It increases the probability of doing something that's impactful in the world. I think that's absolutely true. You have to follow interestingness because you don't know what the stepping stones are that lead to things like that. And if you just try to achieve them as an objective, then you'll be deceived because the world is deceptive and you get the wrong stepping stones. And so this is the way to make it more likely that you'll do something that's really impactful. It's just that you have to accept that you don't know what that thing is. We don't know where the final destination, if there even is a final destination, is going to lead, but it's somewhere hopefully interesting and more likely to be impactful.
I want to ask some logistics about the experiment that you did. So, for example, now in my life, I understood that, let's say, when Einstein's theory of relativity came, three other people were close to find the theory of relativity, and you mentioned something in the similar to that. And you said that when people found the same discoveries with different paths, and they got closer to finding the same similar images. So, do you think there is a correlation with those two things?
Yeah. So. That's a complicated question. So I think, like, one thing about innovation and discovery is that the more things that have been discovered, the more things can be discovered. And so, like, what we can achieve in this decade is different than what could have been achieved 100 years ago, and that's because there are more stepping stones now than there were 100 years ago. And so every stepping stone that comes into existence is, actually causing other things to become more likely. And so, like, at Einstein's time, I mean, following this interpretation of history, then, there were a number of discoveries that preceded Einstein that I don't think they make Einstein an easy discovery, but they make it possible that somebody like Einstein could make that discovery, whereas before that would have been just inconceivable. And, this is true, even though it's a little bit demoralizing, because people like to think that if they really try hard enough, they could do anything. But I mean, just think about it. Like, things like, the Wright brothers finally figured out how to get a plane to fly at a certain time in the 20th century. I mean, if it had been 100 years earlier, it would have been a complete lost cause, completely pointless for them to have spent time on that, no matter how smart they are, because things like engines and so forth wouldn't have been around that could have supported that. The stepping stones didn't even exist. And so, yeah, you're really trapped in your era and looking at the stepping stones that are around you. And I think visionaries are often the first to see where stepping stones lead. And this is a missing part of the story that I didn't say in the point about Pickbreeder, but that, people often ask me then, well, but how do people like Einstein do what they did then, or the Wright brothers, or like, how did people do these big discoveries? Like the space program, when they got a space shuttle to go to the moon or something like that. How do they do that? Well, it's because in general that like somebody realized that the stepping stones have been laid. Or like the first computer was built with vacuum tubes. If vacuum tubes were worked on for more than 100 years before that, with no one thinking about computers. They weren't making them for computers, but somebody realized then later that they could be used now to make a computer. And this happens over and over again. And the people who have those realizations are usually the visionaries. And usually we tell stories in hindsight as if it was an objective. So you'll say, like the Wright brothers had this objective to build a plane. And so this disproves what this guy's saying, like that actually does work. But I don't think that's actually what happened. I think what it is that they were the first to recognize that the stepping stones had been laid. It couldn't have happened at another era in time. I mean, Steve Jobs is like this too, because if you think about like the iPhone, which is an incredible step, the things that preceded are like an iPod, like a music player leading to a phone is not a normal thing to see. Like, I think I would have been thinking, okay, iPod leads to a better music player. That's probably like the success, we get like tape recorders and we got record players and we got like Walkman, and it's like eventually we get to an iPod. Where are we going next? It looks like it's a succession towards an objective, which is like this ideal music player. But then we take this tangent over here and say, oh, okay, iPhone. And that's a huge, huge thing. But like if you had gone back 30 years and if somebody had said, well, you need an iPhone, I mean, forget it. Like there's no internet, like there's no Wi-Fi, like there's not like the condensed electric technology. Like you don't have anything you would need. So it'd be pointless to have this as an objective. It's the recognition that the stepping stones have snapped into place that suddenly creates opportunity either in your personal life or just in the world at large.
But so is it the same in the Pickbreeder? Did you saw the same thing? Like when other people discover something, you found other people at the same time discover with so many mutations discovering something?
Oh yeah, good question. So actually there's a bit of a difference, I think, in how I would explain that. So what I think you're referring to is the fact that, for example, faces were discovered separately in different lineages several times. So they're like rediscoveries of the same type of thing. Now, it's obviously underneath the hood different, in the same sense as like, there's dogs, everybody knows dogs, but there's also a species in Australia that looks like a dog or looked like a dog. It's actually not a dog. It comes from a whole other tree of life, a whole other branch of life. But it's like a dog-like thing. I forget what it's called, but it's really interesting. If you can find it like on YouTube or something, there's some old videos of these weird dog-like things that actually aren't dogs. But so like that's the kind of sense in which you get two different faces in Pickbreeder. They're actually not related at all. They were discovered in completely separate lineages, but they both look like faces and they both act like faces. Like act like means in the sense that if I let them have children, their children also look like faces. So it's like something fundamental face-like has actually been discovered. And so what explains that kind of a thing? There's a concept that I haven't mentioned yet, but is that in open-ended systems, some things are more inevitable than others. Like you can ask yourself, what discoveries are inevitable and which discoveries are not inevitable? Like really are surprising that they would happen. And of course it depends on what era you're in, but like, for example, like I would say, for example, like if you go back to the beginning of civilization, I'm not sure what that period exactly is, but before anything had been invented. So you've got humans just living in caves or something. Somebody had thought of a wheel, right? Like I would say that's inevitable. There's something about wheels that it's so close enough to the start that like probably if you restarted the whole thing over again, that would just happen again. It's just like somehow inevitable. It's close to the initial stepping stones. Fire maybe too, some things like that. Or you could ask evolutionarily too. Like if we rear-end Earth from the start, let's say with a single-celled organism, our original ancestor, would we get humans? I mean, I would say that's not inevitable. That seems like a whole rerun of the tree of life. Maybe not. Who knows? It seems like it's a low probability event to get a human. But is photosynthesis inevitable? That might be inevitable. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there were photosynthetic organisms would evolve again in another run of life. And so, like, there's this kind of idea that things closer to the beginning of something tend to be more inevitable. And so, like, you can get, like, faces are closer kind of to the start of picture, because it's just really, it's like three circles. It's like two eyes and a mouth, kind of. It's like a face. Like, that's a sort of inevitable thing that even just kind of random perturbations eventually will get you the stepping stones that would allow you to eventually get to a face. But other things that are much more complex, like maybe like a butterfly or something like that might not, or a car, let's say. Car is not, I would say, not inevitable. Like, it's very complex, the stepping stones that you have to go through. And if we reran Pickbreeder again, I'm not sure we'd ever discover another car. And so there's this inevitability concept, or I call it sometimes the cone of inevitability, because as you spread out from the beginning of something, like, it's like the cone, like, gets wider and wider because more and more stuff has been discovered. So there's more and more stuff that can be discovered. And so, like, what we might think is inevitable in the next 10 years is completely different than we would say at the beginning of time.
So, to rephrase, by the way, I love this. This is the peak of my life right now. Yeah, it's like I've learned this so much. It's very interesting. But let me rephrase to what you said about the answer to my question. So you said that basically, similar things can be rediscovered, discovered, like this face and all this stuff again and again, because like life leads to these. This is the fundamental things. You agree with my point that at the time, for example, people needed 100 times to discover a face, and then other people maybe discovered it at 10, and then maybe it reappeared at the 100 breeding points, the face again. So you kind of, you're saying that not all the time they discovered the same thing at the same time, all the people. So kind of, I'm trying to rephrase what you're saying just to make sure that I understand.
Yeah. Let me clarify, because I think it is a little bit confusing what I'm saying. Like, what I'm saying is basically that maybe there's two things I want to distinguish from each other. One is, if you just look at a system from the start, what is inevitable? That would be like the start of evolution, the start of civilization, the start of Pickbreeder. Then there's a different thing, which is looking at a system now, what is inevitable? That's different from thinking from the start, because already a lot of things have already happened now. So we already have all of these stepping stones. So we know what happened. It's already happened. And so both are interesting to think about. Like, what is inevitable? Like, what would humans inevitably invent from the beginning? But also now, what's inevitable given what we know now and the stepping stones that have been laid now? And so, like, when we talk about Einstein, it's more about the now. Like, I don't know that I would think Einstein's insights are inevitable, like, from the beginning of civilization. Like, I don't know, that there's a lot of contingency there in terms of which stepping stones we would traverse. Maybe we're fortunate that we traversed the right ones. But in the year 1900, maybe at that point, it's sort of inevitable, because, like, the stepping stones have to some extent been laid. But I think, inevitability.
So you're saying basically, because we built a lot of layers, it's easier to have the same objection here and here when we do a tree. So this is what you're saying, right?
It's easier for, maybe multiple people to have the same discovery at the same time. But the key is, I think, to be the first. I mean, that's the people who get the credit. So it's really like to realize that the stepping stones are there is the real kind of like key kind of epiphany that you need, is to see, actually, this is possible now. And no one has yet seen that, and people tend to run towards new stepping stones, like ChatGPT or something like that. Like, everybody's obsessed now because it's obviously a stepping stone. It's completely obvious. So everybody knows that it's a stepping stone. So everybody's going to run towards it. It's a bandwagon. But the really interesting moves, I think, are the ones where it's not obvious. Because then, like, you're not following the crowd and you're the only one who realized it.
it was 7 years ago with OpenAI. That was the move that you're referring to, the interestingness of the field.
I mean, I'm just saying now we all realize that ChatGPT is interesting. Like people are going to start chatbot companies and people are going to like create all kinds of products based on top of it. And people are going to use it as a stepping stone because it's obvious it's a stepping stone. And so like now, there's a high chance of many simultaneous discoveries that are the same, which is actually not that good for the people who have those because they're going to be competing with people who are doing the same thing because it's also obvious. Like what can you do with ChatGPT? Now, I'm not saying everything's obvious. There are going to be things that aren't obvious, but a lot of the things are obvious because now we all know about the stepping stone. We all know it's powerful and we all have lots of ideas that are similar about what you might do with it. And so those things are going to get done. But it's the ones that aren't obvious that are really interesting and that will like get a lot of credit and a lot of fame for people because like people won't be expecting it. And those will be the people who just realize, oh, actually there's a direction you can go here that no one saw. And that might be based on something that other people haven't noticed has changed. We all know ChatGPT is a big change in the world. There are other things that are changing in the world that we haven't noticed that matter. You may notice them, but you may not realize they're stepping stones. You may have heard about something. You're like, that doesn't matter to me. Well, someone else it will matter to, and they'll realize you can go somewhere and they'll be the first to realize that. And those are the people who are going to get the credit and be labeled as the visionaries and, really fundamentally change the world.
So I want to get into the ChatGPT and all this stuff and artificial intelligence and all this stuff, but you're probably the person that knows more about this stuff that I ever met. So I'm very excited to ask you questions on this. Okay. But let me finish the process about the breeding thing to close that loop. So it was difficult to create that 10 years ago, that breeding thing. Did you need a lot of computational power? How was it was fundamentally difficult to create that thing at that time?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I don't think computational power was not a problem for this. Like we had the power. I think we also recognized that we could get the power. So I don't think we were worried about compute power. What was more complicated at the time was just like the network. We basically had to create an online service, because this is a breeding online service where you can go in and breed pictures with other people. Because like I said, I could discover something and then you could see it on the site and then breed from that. And we needed that to get this tree of life going because you need to be able to branch off of my discoveries. And so we had to create this whole network of like where people can come in, create accounts, and then breed off each other's stuff, and then integrate the AI into the network. So like it would call the neural networks that were actually underneath the hood that were generating the images and so forth. And that's just like engineering, complicated engineering, but not anything that's, it was not anything prohibitive. It's not like somebody was able to, it's amazing that you could do that. Like it's not amazing. Like it's definitely doable. What was amazing, if anything, was just that no one had thought of doing it before. That was really what distinguishes it. Like no one had created a crowdsourced picture breeding site before that had branching like this. It just hadn't been done. And so in fact, the stepping stones were there. Like we knew how to create networked apps. We knew how to do the neural network stuff. Like we knew the evolutionary algorithms that were underneath the hood. That's all there. And then it was just a realization, hey, if you put all this stuff together, you get Pickbreeder. And then, so it was a new idea. No one had done it before, but I don't think it was really hard in the sense of like prohibitive.
Did you follow the same thinking of what you're presenting? Just it was interesting for you at the time to create that, or you had objection or something?
I think it's a good question because it actually, so it comes before I wrote the book, which is kind of obvious because the outcome of the experiment with Pickbreeder was the reason we wrote the book. So it's like it couldn't have had the book before Pickbreeder. That wouldn't make any sense. The Pickbreeder led us to the book. So before Pickbreeder, I wouldn't have been able to say any of this stuff because none of it was in my head yet. And yet, even though that's true, I actually think I was doing it for those reasons. I just wouldn't have articulated it the same way because I hadn't really thought this through at that time. But it was definitely true that I did not know what the objective was. Like I remember this because it was a problem for me because I was trying to get funding to do it because I was a professor at the time and like the professor needs to get funding to do their research. And like what you need to do to get funding, which just speaks to the whole problem with objectives in our culture, is to tell people what your objective is. so that they can then give you money because they think the objective is worth doing. And the problem I was facing with Pickbreeder is like I was having a lot of trouble. I was struggling with how to explain what the objective is. You know, what is the point of all of it? It's like there's all these people that are coming and they're breeding pictures, but what is the point? Like, why do we need this? It's not like I'm not claiming like the pictures are brilliant works of art that you're going to sell or something. It's like they're just interesting. And so like, why do we need this? Like, why should we make this like as a scientist? But my whole point was, and this is what I tried to argue to get the funding, is I tried to argue the reason that we should do this is that it's interesting. You see, because like, I don't know what I'm going to discover, but I do think that if we had an artifact of like a whole tree of life of something totally artificial, we would learn a huge amount about like how things like that work. And that's just interesting. I don't know what we'll learn. Like, I can't tell you what we're going to get, but we're going to get something. And I pretty much wrote that into my grant application. Like, this is sort of the argument I tried to make, was that this is just really important for us to do because it's extremely interesting. And they just destroyed me. I mean, they were like, it's pointless. Like, it's completely unclear what the point is of this system. I mean, the reviewers were extremely harsh, very objective, and totally tore it apart because they didn't know what the point was, which wasn't a super surprise to me because I knew that that's how the world is. And so I didn't get any funding for it. But I was like, but it's so interesting. I have to do this. It's too interesting. Like, I just wonder, and it's like, I was totally right. Cause look we wouldn't even be having this conversation if I hadn't gone ahead with this. And so had this very strong instinct. I didn't know what the lesson would be. I didn't know it'd be this whole non-objective thing. I didn't know anything, or the myth of the objective paradox, different things you call it. I didn't have any of that in mind. I just thought it was super interesting, and you have to do it because it's so interesting. So I decided that, we're just going to go ahead and do this, even though we don't have any funding. So like I had students, usually like they're PhD students. So like they get paid. Like that's why you need the money, is to pay the students. They had to do it on the side because we didn't have any money for it. So they were working on other projects that could pay them. And then they spent, their evenings or something working on Pickbreeder. But they agreed with me. Like the students who worked on it also thought it was too interesting not to do. Everybody was in agreement that like, this is so interesting. We have to do this, even though no one will pay us to do it. So we just went ahead, and that's very aligned, I think, with the ethos of the book. And the message is just like, do things because they're interesting. Doesn't matter if people don't know where you're going. Doesn't matter if you don't know where you're going. I just had a strong conviction that something interesting is going to happen.
So I have after you found this discovery, so you felt, I don't feel like you felt that you were destined to become a motivational speaker or something, but so you felt like a responsibility to pass this information on, like how so can you explain me some stuff about this?
Yeah. It was really a weird experience because I really come from artificial intelligence. Like, motivational speaking is very, very far from the kind of thing that I would be trying to think about. I never thought about being a motivational speaker. I still would not consider myself a motivational speaker.
I think you are the best motivational speaker in the world right now.
It's very weird for me to hear that, but it's cool. I mean, I'm glad to be able to motivate people or to give them something useful. I mean, that's obviously gratifying. But it wasn't what was on my mind. I mean, I really just wanted to be a good AI researcher. And when this discovery came out, it was, in my mind, it was really about AI, because what I was thinking was that this will change how we make algorithms, because algorithms were also very objectively driven at the time in the field. And I just wanted to make the point that, look, sometimes algorithms that are not objectively driven actually make better discoveries than the objectively driven algorithms. And so I went out with this point, which was contrarian and, iconoclastic, even like out into the world to talk about this. And people were welcoming of the message because people like controversial stuff. So people liked to invite me to AI conferences to talk to large audiences and sort of like talk about this kind of shocking result. And it was controversial. Like, some people don't like it because it's kind of against the usual way that the field works, which is very objective. But it's always leads to interesting discussion. But I found this thing, and like I said, it was really weird that people at these conferences, remember, this is computer science conferences, wanted to talk to me about their personal life. That was when I started to discover, like they said, this is a really interesting point, like about the algorithms, but also I have objectives, like what does it mean for me, or like my company's objectives? And this would be like snuck in at the end or something, like people would sneak in a question or just come up to me after. And then eventually, like I got invited to talk to a bunch of artists. This was the real kind of inflection point. because somebody at one of these computer science conferences like was a student at the same time at this art school, and he said, all the artists at this school, like these art students, would love to hear this message. And I saw like the superficial Pickbreeder connection made sense. It's like, well, there's people breeding pictures in the art school, but I knew that's not the point. It's not the Pickbreeder. It's the non-objective point. Like that would be interesting. Like I could totally make the connection. Like I had no idea what this would be like because it's so weird. I mean, I never speak to like artists. I speak to computer scientists, but I could see why this might be interesting. So I agreed to go give this talk at the art school. It's called Rhode Island School of Design. And man, it was just like life altering for me because they were almost crying, like the students who talked to me after. And they gave me a room and they let the students come in like one after another, like one-on-one for sessions, like to actually talk to me in depth. They could sign up. So that was really interesting. And so they would come in and they almost crying, like one after another. They want to tell me their life story. What'd you think? Because I mean, I'm just talking about algorithmic stuff. Like in my point of view, up to then, because my speech is mostly about algorithmic points, and then there's people crying and telling me their life story, and the life stories generally were, I can't justify why I'm doing what I'm doing to my parents, to my teachers. Like I can't explain. My parents wonder, how are you going to make money? Like why are you doing this pointless stuff that has no objective? And so I was in there saying, I feel for the first time I have an explanation. Like it doesn't have to have an objective. It's just interesting. People can follow things because they're interesting and it's actually principled. It's not some crazy random thing. It's not motivational speaking where you're just like, yeah, you have permission. Go ahead and do what you want. No, there's actually like a concrete motivation here that's based in empirical research. And that made them feel really better. And so it's like a catharsis. And coming out of that, I was just like, this is a huge issue. Like this is not just a computer issue. This is not an AI issue. This is like an issue in life. And I could see immediately, it's not just life. It's like institutions too. Like the foolish people who decided to reject my Pickbreeder application because it doesn't have a clear goal. And so that's the whole granting infrastructure of the United States. And then companies who work through OKRs, which means objectives and key results, which are just like completely ubiquitous across Silicon Valley, for example. Like that's all objectively driven. If we want innovation, then according to this theory, this should not actually work well. It should actually be antithetical to innovation. And so I could see immediately that this just implies all kinds of things, like about everything in the world. And I didn't think of it as like a motivational speech type of thing. I thought of it as like, I didn't even know what to think of it as because it seems to apply to everything because everything is objectively driven in the entire culture from personal life to companies to institutions to governments to education, like everything. So I didn't know what like genre or anything this book is even in. I was just like, it's an important point. People need to be discussing it. And I had a lot of trouble to situate the book like from a strategic perspective because like publishers are like, what's the audience? Well, I'm just like, well, it's everything. Everything is it's like, this is about literally everything. But it's very difficult to make that argument from a marketing perspective. But the thing is, I didn't want to lose that. I could feel the pull to like make it about a certain demographic or something, but I just wanted to that's why the book is kind of weird. Like it's hard to place. Is it a self-help book? Is it a social critique? Is it a scientific work of, a scientific work of academic value? Like what kind of book is this? Well, it's everything because it's just supposed to get the argument out there and start the discussion for everybody in every field. And so I'm not sure it's successful in that way, but that's what the reasoning was, like why we wanted to do it.
So I think it's funny that you describe that because I see the same pattern here. You are not trying to become a preacher or a motivational speaker, but because you found it interesting, and at the moment you found it interesting, that's why I think you are very good at this, because you are not trying to do that. So I see this pattern over and over again with everything in life after you describe it. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's totally true. Like, this is not at all where I would have planned my career to be giving semi-motivational speeches. It's totally crazy to think of that. But yeah, it's just like, it was interesting. It's an interesting, I don't even have a real goal with that. Like why would I accept all these talks and interviews like this, like to talk about this when it's not directly aligned with the career of an AI scientist? Like what does this have to do with anything that I'm supposed to be doing? but I don't even know. I don't know what the point is, but I know I don't need to have a point. I just know this is very interesting to be able to talk about this topic because it's a topic of such importance. And I'm just sure good things will come of it. I don't know what they are, but I certainly good things have come of it for me. Like there's no question at this point after writing that book, it's brought all kinds of things into my life that I wouldn't have expected, including the opportunity just to talk to much more diverse people than I would have just always talking to computer scientists. So that's all that matters. It's just interesting. It's a new stepping stone, and it's worth seeing where it leads.
By the way, I cannot. You understand why I have so much? I don't think I did another podcast with so much passion and all stuff. So I'm very, very, very grateful that we are sitting here. But this is not the only interesting thing that you did in your life. So you were a recent part. You were a part of OpenAI in the beginning. Now OpenAI is all over the news. People think that it will become one of the biggest companies in the world. So I want you to explain me kind of your AI career, how it evolved, and the early days of OpenAI.
Okay, sure. And actually, I think it's important to clarify. I was actually not at the beginning of OpenAI. I came in 2020, and I don't know, it was like 4 or 5 years old already at the time. And I left in 2022. So I was there for 2 years, somewhere in the middle. And of course, I did get a chance to see.
It was not didn't have the name that it has now everywhere. So
no, that's true. So it didn't. That is true.
It was unknown to people back then.
Yeah, so. That's true. That's true. Yeah. So that's just 2 years of my life. So I actually, spent most of my career outside of OpenAI, and I was a professor for 10 years at the beginning in Florida at the University of Central Florida. I started a company, it's called Geometric Intelligence, while I was a professor. And that was probably well timed because it was just at this time where lots of companies were wanting to get into AI, and Uber ended up acquiring our company. And that's around
for how much? Are you allowed to say? Or
no, I can't say that.
Okay, cool.
But they did acquire. They didn't publicize. Some of these deals were publicized, but ours was kept confidential. It's a company's decision, I guess, what's confidential, what's not. So that brought me out to Silicon Valley and corporations and things like that. And I became I was the head of core AI research for a while, which meant the basic research unit at Uber. I wasn't the head of all of AI. That was Zubin Garamani, who was one of my co-founders, but at the company. But I was heading core, the basic research unit. So I got to see what it's like to lead basic research in industry. And then what happened was that Uber decided to get out of the basic research business. That happened about 2020. And I was leading basic research. So it's like bad news for me. Like I'm leading basic research and they're getting out of basic research. They were very accommodating and willing for me to switch over to something more applied, but I wanted to do basic research. So this wasn't really good for me. And so at that time, I had this opportunity to move to OpenAI. And I took that opportunity. I started what was called the open-endedness team at OpenAI, and worked on open-ended algorithms. It was definitely, AI research. It wasn't this kind of book stuff. It was just AI research. And I worked on that for a couple of years. And the last end of the story, I think you probably don't know, but I just wanted to mention it, that in 2022, last year, I decided that I would like to start a company that would actually make the world work more like the book says it should. Because I've been talking to people about this book for 7 years at that point. Now it's 8 years old now, but back then it's 7 years old. And after 7 years, it's like, man, I've really got an earful about like the way people wish things worked and the way they actually work. And this includes the way they work in the corporate world and in the academic world and in personal life and in social media and the internet. It's like everything is so objective. I mean, even in social media, it's like, looking for likes and looking for followers. And it's very objective, like maximizing. And I've got this whole theory, which is not just a self-help type of thing, which is also algorithmic, because I've invented algorithms like with Joe Lehman, like novelty search, that are about how to mechanically actually structure a system to not work in that way. So it occurred to me that maybe we could structure a system with humans in the loop that works in this non-objective way, which is more loyal to what the book recommends, the way that society should work. And then we could actually create a network that would actually work in this more serendipitous way. And so I started a company that's at the beginning of this year to do that. It's called Maven. And that's what I've been working on since then for the last 6 months.
Very interesting. So you decided to leave OpenAI to start and get this message across that we talk in the first 40, 50 minutes of the podcast, right? This is the objective of the company.
Yeah. So yeah, it is kind of like that. Yeah. I mean, it's, this is another one of these kind of weird leaps. I mean, first of all, it's a weird leap to start from AI to now sort of social critique, but it's also a weird leap to go from social critique now to like a system that will be on the internet. It's all weird, but that's sort of in the spirit of what I'm saying anyway. It seems to me a natural stepping stone. Like I have a book that I've heard from people for years and years what they want. So I've identified an area of demand, I believe, that people want more serendipity. Now, most people think of serendipity as random, and therefore they don't think of it as a product you can deliver, because like, how can you deliver randomness? So it's just like it happens or it doesn't happen. I can't put a bow on it and give it to you as a present. It's going to happen or not. But to me, it's not like that, because to me, serendipity was basically the algorithmic basis for what the things I was designing. They're like basically serendipity generators. Like this open-ended systems are about serendipity. They don't go towards a goal. We don't know where they're going, but they produce over and over again transformative things. And so that's serendipity. Serendipity means you have a transformative experience you weren't planning on. And I'm saying I know how to build those. So like if you put those things together, it just made sense to me that like, I think people want this. I know how to build things like this. You should be able to make a product that basically like gives it to people. And it's not just like a product. Like to me, it's more like, I just felt like it would be virtuous in some way, like to actually make a point that is partly social, like about the world, like that we could maybe make things work a little bit more in a way that makes us feel good about ourselves. Because I think social media in general doesn't really feel good because you're actually trying to constantly get attention and stuff like that, which is slimy at some level. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I mean, of course, there's like huge benefits to being successful in this world, but like, it's not like actually like going straight to the heart of sort of what makes humanity fulfilling, which has something more to do with just following what's interesting, your passions and so forth. And so I just thought that to create a system that would be more aligned with that would be really interesting again, just interesting to try. And I should be able to, I understand the building blocks algorithmically of that. So I thought, let's give it a shot. And that's what I decided to try to do.
It's very interesting what you're describing. So basically, but you already did that for me, right? Like I described you. So I changed my whole kind of shifted my orientation or goals in life just to this perspective of more randomness and serendipity, what is interesting. So now your goal is to try to engineer that for other people's life. And how do you plan to do that is like the question that I'm asking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, it's true that like you said, it seems like what I've said has had some impact on you. And there's a lot of people I've spoken to over the last 8 years who have taken some inspiration to some extent, maybe from this message. But what was bothering me about it is that it's not really scalable. It's like, I often will talk to one person and maybe that helps them in some way thinking about things, but I just wanted to change everything at once. Like it's like, I would like to create a way to scale this insight so that like it could really change the way things work in the world. And so that's really to go beyond just talking. And I mean, it's not like it's bad to talk. Like I've obviously enjoyed it. And it's like, it really feels good if it has some value to somebody, that feels great to convey that. But I thought maybe I could do something more scalable. And so how does it work? Well, the general idea is that we're going to try to get people to tell us what's on their mind that they find interesting, and then to find the stepping stones in the world, which would be most transformative to them. And that doesn't mean just like a match, like it's like, if you tell me like, for example, I like video games and I'm like, well, here's a video game website. That wouldn't be the kind of thing I'm saying, because it's obvious. That's objective, actually. That's an objective thing. Like, oh, if I want to play video games, then I'll buy a video game system. It's all totally objective. It's not serendipitous at all. There's no surprise. Of course you bought a video game system. What we're going to deliver you are the things that you might not actually expect, where you actually discover things that you didn't know were out there for you. And so that would be the goal of the system. I don't want to give too much away about exactly how it works. because it's so early and we haven't really opened up. But that's the spirit of the idea.
So kind of life coaching in a way, but with this theory in mind.
No, I wouldn't call it life coaching. It's much more connecting you to the people who could be transformative if you would connect to them. Because opportunities lie in people. Like where are all the opportunities in the world that might be an opportunity for you personally? There's probably a lot, but you don't know about 99% of them. I mean, they exist inside of people.
I'm sorry that I'm pushing too hard on that, but to understand, if I touch to some innovation that you are doing, please tell me to shut up. But so it's like finding a job or internship or something, like connecting people that have this passion and interesting to the other people so something like along these lines.
It could be something like finding a job, but I don't think that's not the main kind of motivation. Is not to just help you find a job. It's more that anything that you're thinking about could connect to something interesting, and it could just be that it's just something you're curious about, and you don't know what the point of it is. But if you had the right connections, you could pursue it. It could be questions that you have. It could be ideas that you have. It could be things you're curious about. Like there's all kinds of things that could lead to stepping stones.
To be honest, I find this very interesting idea because I see demand on this stuff for an employer standpoint. For example, I would be dying to meet people that they are doing that they are interested to try some things for YouTube and employ them. Like they want to try some, or they just interested to this YouTubing thing, so it's and we don't usually when you have a job like that. My only principle when I'm hiring people in my team is that they need to be 100% excited about what they're going to do. So you're kind of bridging the gap, because it's difficult to find people that they don't want the money and they don't want the fame, and they're just interested intrinsically to what their this task is. So I think there is a lot of potential in this thing. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, and I agree with that hiring philosophy too. I definitely mostly want somebody who's just really, really inspired by the idea, more than just like the pay or whatever, or the benefits, or it's like the idea should be just independently inspiring, and it's the kind of person you want to work with. So it can touch on that, but hopefully it'll touch on all kinds of different ways that people might like to be connected as well.
So can I ask a stupid question, please?
Sure, I doubt it's stupid, but happy to answer your question.
So what? How large language model and what AI is?
Can you rephrase that? I'm not sure what you mean. Like what AI?
What AI is and how large language models work.
Oh, okay. Because what is AI?
We hear it all the time, and I'm kind of clueless in what does it actually like. A lot of time. I was interviewing one guy from the previous podcast, and he was asking me, how the toilet works. And I was starting to explain. I know what toilet is. I use it all the time. But when I started explaining him, I had no clue how it worked. So kind of this is the question.
I see. Gotcha. Well, AI is like a field, so it's not just one thing. It's a whole scientific research field, which has been around for decades. And so it's really just people trying to figure out ways to program a computer to act smart like a person. And of course, we could argue about what it means to be intelligent or smart. We could argue about that, but I don't think that's really that important, the exact definition of it. It's just trying to make it more like what people can do. And so people have been trying all kinds of things for decades, all kinds of things. And some of those things are not related to other things. Like there's just very diverse ideas because nobody has had any idea like what will be the thing that sticks. Like what's the really good basis to build off of, to build like human level intelligence? Like people don't know. And so they've been just trying all kinds of things. And there's a long history there, but so far as of today, the technique that really won out so far, and I say so far because it could change, like it could turn out, 10 years from now, something else is dominant. But so far, what appears to have come to dominate are neural networks. And, like if you go back 20 years, it was not clear at all that neural networks are like going to be the thing. There are lots of people who are totally against them, but they turned out just to be far and above more interesting in terms of the things they could do, especially as they became larger. And they became larger over time because compute increased. So as compute has been increasing, the ability to like bigger and bigger computers, it has allowed us to have bigger and bigger neural networks.
So the same thing that we were discussing before, like now it put the base so things can breathe more direct. So, anyway, sorry, continue. I just wanted to rephrase that.
No, there's been an open-ended process within the field of AI of like different stepping stones. People choose a stepping stone they find most interesting, build off that, see where it goes, so forth. And some people are more objective than others, and I think those will do worse in this field. As in, they'll say, let's look at the performance of this stepping stone. And if it doesn't perform as well as this stepping stone, I'll just jump to that one and forget about this one. I'm saying that's bad, because the thing is that the performance measure that's objective has nothing to do with whether this is interesting. Interestingness is independent of any measure. It's a subjective notion because we don't know because it's this like causes like fallacy. Like we think that if you think that the pictures that lead to butterflies, you wouldn't be able to get a butterfly. If you think that the things that lead to human level intelligence look like human level intelligence, you're probably wrong too, which is very confusing. Right. So it's like if we see AIs that are getting closer to human level performance, a lot of people think that that's an indication that's the correct path. But according to my theory, it's not an indication of anything either way, because like we're so far away from that objective that like it could be that this is just deception. It just looks like it's going in the right direction, but it's actually going to hit a brick wall.
Yes, it's like a breeding thing. It looks like it's going to develop to a human, but it leaves. And the thing that doesn't lead to a human, seems like it will look to a human, then it leads to a human.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem we face as a field in AI, is that like it could be very deceptive, and it's likely to be.
But I want to ask, because I'm sorry that I will try to get some bit of advice or a motivational thing, but like how you say interestingness. So you feel, is that a feeling? Is that an intellectual understanding of interestingness? How can you decide what is interesting? Is it a feeling? Is it intellectual thing? Is that out of your options, which you are your gut feeling? I'm sorry that I'm getting too technical, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah. So, and let me just tie up that last third, just for people who are left dangling. The neural networks eventually led to the LLMs. So that's how we got to the LLMs. It's basically a kind of a neural network, and even that story is interesting. But it's also interesting to talk about what is interestingness. Like, what are we talking about? I mention it over and over again when I talk about this kind of stuff, because it's the alternative to the objective. Like a lot of people, when they hear this, that there's an objective paradox, which is one way I put it. Like the objective paradox means that setting an objective can prevent you from reaching it. So it's paradoxical in that way. Like the whole point of the objective is to help you, but it actually hurts you. So I call that the objective paradox. And when people hear that, then they say, I can't have an objective. So you must be saying that I should just be random. And that is not what I'm saying. Like to be random is not to be smart. Randomness is just foolish. And in fact, it's insane. Like there's very few people who are just completely random in life. And so the question that really matters is, what is a principled alternative to having an objective? Something that makes sense, because we need principles to be able to decide what to do in our life. It's not like we just should choose randomly. I'll just flip a coin whether I'll spend the night outside or inside tonight. Like it doesn't make any sense. And so the principle then is interestingness. That's the alternative to the objective. Interestingness is a subjective notion, which is a personal assessment of whether something seems to me to be worth spending time on in my life. Then it's interesting. And it's subjective. So I can't prove it or measure it. I might use some measurements as a sort of side evidence, but that's not the final reason that I think something is interesting. It has to do with just a subjective view. So it's like why I thought Pickbreeder would be interesting. Like there's no measurement to show it's interesting. It just seems really interesting to me.
but let's say sometimes it's interesting for me in the night to text a girl and go visit her and spend the time with her. Like, so what is because we have biological needs to eat. It's interesting for me to eat. It's interesting for me to not eat. But you are referring only to goals. I just want to draw this distinction.
Well, first, we should again distinguish between modest objectives and ambitious objectives. Because like I tried to concede before, like I'm not against setting modest objectives. Like that would be reasonable. And so if you want to meet a girl, it might be considered a modest. I mean, it depends who you are. I mean, for some people that's ambitious. For some people it's modest, but it might be modest in the sense that like this isn't like something that's unprecedented that no one has ever done before. Like we know how to get in touch with the girl that I want to see. I can just send her a text. That sounds modest relatively. It's not some super innovative idea. Now, there might be innovative ways of meeting women or something like, I mean, possibly, but that's not what we're talking about. We're just saying, do you want to talk to this girl? Of course, that's just a reasonable objective. So I would just say that is objective and it's modest and it's not really related to what we're discussing. What we're discussing are things that are like way out there, blue sky, like innovation, that kind of a thing. So for those
this is the line that you draw. So if you want to say not for everyday normal things to do or for objectives, for example, if you want to eat, that's not, it's a modest goal, like gain weight or lose weight. We know how to do that. It's not, or get a girlfriend. We know how to do that. Okay. Maybe go, but to do something. So the line is like that. So if you want to do something really, something that never happened before, this is where you apply this thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree with that, but it's a complicated distinction because, in some things that we might call modest, there are little ambitious pockets. It's like meeting a girl is one thing, but, finding lifelong love is like another thing. And then like that might be considered ambitious. Like just texting someone won't mean that you want to live with someone forever. And so like to find that person, even if you believe that there's a person like that, or you want to find someone like that, like that's a goal. That is an objective. I might say that is ambitious, but that's why, like finding the person you want to marry, maybe that could be considered to be ambitious because it's not an everyday occurrence. Like we don't know what you should do really. And that is a place where people make this mistake of being too objective, because you go on the dating site and then you enter all your criteria. You're just like a blonde hair, blue eyes, like this height, like this weight. And then it's like, they have to be that intelligent, have a job. Like it's like all these things. I have an objective. I know what I want, but it doesn't work. Then you meet that person and it's like, actually, I don't want to spend any time with this person at all. And so like, this is actually just a manifestation of the objective paradox because it's actually the things you really want actually don't look like what you want. And it's true in love, just like all ambitious endeavors. And that's a cliche. I mean, many people say this about love. It's like you can only find love when you're not looking for love. Like people say things like that. It sounds like a thing out of my book. In fact, I think we did quote that in the book just to make that point. But like it's like love is just an ambitious objective. It's just one of many different ambitious objectives you could have. And so it will apply in those kinds of things. But it's true things like getting lunch or losing weight. Let's say losing weight is generally a modest goal in the sense that I think we do know what the stepping stones are and they actually work. Like you can exercise, you can eat less of bad calories. Like there's things you can do. Like they're pretty well known, but there's still some pockets of innovation that are remaining. Like there may be ways of losing weight that are more innovative than others. Possibly, maybe they might seem crazy, but it still may be worth trying because it's interesting. And so there still might be room for innovation there. But the general idea is like not super ambitious usually, I think, because most people will just follow the standard template and it'll work. And that's okay for that.
So I want to, so you touched on, so you have this life principle of interestingness. And when I saw that, I developed a small theory with my teacher about the topic, and I wanted to ask you if it's the same thing. Because in life, you don't know if God exists, or you are not sure about anything. Like there is no proof, there is no actual things that maybe is worth pursuing or something like that. So the only thing that, because maybe you teach a kid in one way of how to be disciplined, and it turns out to be the wrong way to teach the kid, because like you're forcing him to do something.
Yeah.
So kind of always the thing that it's obvious to do, sometimes it backfires and you never know what's the answer. So we came up with this theory, and when I saw your theory, I was like, maybe this is exactly the same thing. So actually just have as a principle in life to have fun and choose paths that are fun. So and when I saw the interestingness, so it's just, you just change the word to maybe a bit more sophisticated than fun. So I was curious to hear, like, do you see any correlation with these two things?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, interesting or fun is kind of it's just a proxy for interestingness. It's true. Like it could be a way of deciding what's interesting for you is if it's fun. They're definitely often feel similar to me. I mean, I think things I find interesting are often fun to pursue. So that's like very true, actually. I don't know if they're always the same, like as in, you know, it's possible that I could see that something has a lot of potential, but it's not necessarily fun. But I still think it's interesting because I can see it has potential. But maybe then, because I wouldn't find it fun, I'd hope someone else would pursue it.
But that will make it fun if you believe that it's interesting and worth pursuing.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, you're right. It is hard to disentangle fun from interesting. Like I would, but the thing is, I guess the distinction for me would be, I think there are fun things that aren't interesting. I think. So it's like going on a roller coaster. Like, I don't think it's really interesting, but I do find it fun. And yeah, I mean, yeah. So I think the problem is fun is a bigger concept than just interesting, because there's lots of fun things that aren't really that interesting.
Okay, I will not try to push back on that, but I understand what you mean.
No, I actually think you have a good point. Like, I think I don't mean to dismiss the point. Like, I think it's a good heuristic, or like a rule of thumb, is just things that you find fun are a good thing to follow if you're wanting to do things that are interesting. Like, if you're not sure, how do I know if something is interesting? I mean, I think it's a good question to ask. Is it fun? Like, that's a good question to ask yourself. That could be a good sign.
And when you have fun, actually, when you have that as a principle, then you are learning more. You are more excited to go to work. You are more all these things. So it doesn't feel like work and all these things. So
very true.
Yes. So. But it's interesting when you're saying that. So if it's not interesting to go to the roller coaster, maybe it's not even fun. Like, you are like ending this and you're like, did I actually had fun?
That's a good question. I mean, is it, I mean, to me, like, it's interesting is sort of like, it should then be a stepping stone of some sort. So like, if it opens up new opportunities, that could be that it deserved to be called interesting. Does going on a roller coaster do that? I'm not, maybe it does. I'm not totally sure.
And the thing is, I come back to your point that you drew the distinction of, if that will help you have innovation in the future, that fun, then that's the distinction, because maybe the roller coaster will not help you at all to create something new. It's like a basic thing that you're doing. So I don't know if maybe that's kind of
like a little
good
bit
principle.
I mean, it's a fuzzy thing. I mean, it's hard to, really disentangle these two things, because of course the roller coaster, like, one thing a roller coaster could do for me is make me realize I like roller coasters. That actually would be a discovery. It's a personal discovery. It's not a discovery for the whole world, but for me, like, then I could try all kinds of roller coasters I never thought of trying before, because now I realize I'm interested in exploring this space, and I opened up a whole new space. That way, I think it is interesting. But if it's just I'm going back to the amusement park to go on the same roller coaster that I've gone on 15 times before just because I find it fun, there I have less. I would less expect it to be interesting. It's just fun then, maybe. So it's very context dependent.
Very, very interesting. By the way, because I'm having peak fun, but I want to be respectful of your time as well. How much time do you have to spend on this podcast more?
I think maybe 10 minutes realistically, because I have another meeting.
Okay, cool. So 10 minutes will be amazing. So let's try to close that gap, because I ask a lot of questions about the interestingness thing and the fun thing, but you didn't finish the what is AI and like how large language models work.
Yeah, right. So going back to what is AI? So there's all these methods people developed, and they're different from each other, and these methods are, you got to understand that they're like lifetimes of passion poured into them. People thought like, we just need to write like logical rules and this will like capture human expertise. And then they spent 40 years of their life just trying to do that, just pouring everything into it, many, many people. And so this is why like the field, people take these arguments about what is the best method, like very personally, like in the field, because it's like they've invested their whole life in there. They've made these bets on their stepping stones. And so when a winner emerges, it can be painful for the other people who aren't on the winning side. And it does seem like right now a big winner has emerged, which is the neural networks. Like I said, the neural networks are based on brain-like principles. I mean, you can debate and people debate, is it really like a brain? Some people would say it's not really brain-like. But it's rough. It's vaguely motivated by like the structure of brains. It's called an artificial neural network. And at first it was like these little toy things that do like really kind of silly stuff that it's not really that impressive. But gradually over time, they got more and more sophisticated. And what I think the big realization was that they get better the more compute we have. And that wasn't so true of other methods. It's like our computers are getting more and more and more and more powerful. And the neural networks would get more powerful with the computers, whereas other methods just kind of didn't get that much better with the computers. And so that's a really exciting thing because suddenly like you have an AI type of system that actually gets more powerful just with hardware without any new innovations or ideas or anything. And so not to say there weren't more innovations.
So that's the bottleneck now, the computing power.
I wouldn't say that's the bottleneck because there's still a need for more ideas. I think we've gotten closer to something that looks more human-like to the point where some people might say that it's just compute. But I think that we're again running into the problem of deception. Just because like GPT-4 or something looks a bit like talking to a person doesn't necessarily mean it's on the path to a person. And so it's not known and so we can't just say, oh, no more innovation is needed. I suspect more innovation is still needed, which is why like the ground is still open for even other methods potentially because we can't be sure. But right now it's just dominating.
And your theory is saying that maybe in a different fields of AI than the large language model can get you to human closer because you never know.
Yeah, or just a different large language model architecture. Large language models are a good non-objective example too, because like no one would have predicted this is the path to AGI like a few years ago. That people were doing what all large language models do is they predict the next token in a sequence. So like you show them lots of text and they get good at predicting what comes next by seeing lots of examples. Like no one would have said 5 years ago, like, oh, this is it. AGI is coming because of this thing. They didn't work that well. Like they were small. Like it was like GPT-1, GPT-2. They were cool. They were interesting. That's the thing. They were interesting. But would someone invest $10 million to make, GPT-3? Well, actually someone did. I mean, it was OpenAI. It was a good move, but I don't think it could be thought of as an objective move. It was basically an interestingness motivated move because you have no idea where this is going to go. It's one weird thing. It's taking a neural network to predict the next token. There are all kinds of other neural network applications and methods that like also had huge amounts of mindshare. Like a DeepMind, they were having neural networks play games. Like they were beating like the human Go champion, for example. Like that looked like a possible route to eventually getting to human level intelligence. And, this large language model route would have been like kind of several steps down in the ranking of like probable ways to get there at some point in time. But then as we get to GPT-3, it's like, wait a second. And then GPT-4 is like, wait a second again, ChatGPT somewhere in there. And so now they've just taken up like all the mind share is that like, this is it. Like, it's just so reminiscent. It looks a lot like the objective. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we one stepping stone away because it's so close, or is it a deceptive trap? Like that's the question. Which situation are we in? But even if it's deceptive, it doesn't mean we throw out neural networks and large language models. It would mean maybe we need a different architecture. Like it's not clear how far you have to back up is the thing. We do have to back up to the beginning of the field of AI. No, I doubt it. Like some of the stuff is probably still useful, but we might need to back up a couple steps to like, well, wait a second. What is the underlying architecture of these things? Maybe it needs to be changed or something like that, but it still might be a neural network. And we don't know. Like, this is what research is about. Like, we don't know exactly what these moves are going to need to be or what they will be. But there is a sense, obviously, among the world that we're closer than we used to be.
So are you afraid of these things? Are you afraid of the singularity? Are you afraid of this stuff? You embrace it? What's your thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, I don't have I'm not sure. I have no idea how close these things are. So I'm more of like not sure. In terms of timeline, I couldn't give you a recommendation. But I do think we should be worried about it because the implications are humongous. And the problem with the implications is that we don't really know what they are. And so we don't actually know where this stepping stone leads. And I don't mean GPT-4, I mean AGI, like general intelligence. Like, if we actually created general intelligence, that's a stepping stone, again, in my way of thinking. It has a lot of things that will follow from it immediately. But what are those? I don't know what those all are. It's very hard to understand. It's hard to understand that world where there's a thing which is a reproducible machine. Like, I could just copy it a million times, which is smarter than you and me. Well, maybe you'll invite it onto the podcast and you'll have no other guests ever again. But then again, why should you even host the podcast? It can be the host too. Well, then what's the point of anything? Like, I don't really understand what's going on at that point. I mean, I think maybe I imagine that people still matter, because what it doesn't have, no matter how smart it is your personal experience. So it's not you. So it doesn't have your personal experience. We relate to each other through our personal experiences. So I care about your life story. It can't, no matter what pretend life story GPT throws at me, that's not a real life story. It's not a real life. So maybe things still, there's some personhood that still matters, but it's a pretty weird world. Like, I don't understand that world at all. I do think it's extremely disruptive. I don't know if things like money even matter anymore. It's like there's abundant, infinite resources, but then again, who controls those resources? Like, what's going on? I don't understand it at all. Are there robots mining for other robots and they build products and just give them to people and we're like their pets? But I don't mean to sound humorous about it too, because I think it's very concerning, because it's so impossible to understand. There could be huge downsides to a world like that and huge upsides. And so I think we need to be very sober and very careful coming into something like that. And so I think people are right to approach this cautiously, like right away.
So I want you to promise, by the way, if you see in the future that I have any success, you can claim that you are responsible for any success that I have because because I literally changed my whole perspective about life with your stuff. So
thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that. I mean, that definitely makes me feel good to hear that.
Yes. And I'm not going to say that I'm cool or whatever, but I'm a 23-year-old that I'm watching your stuff, found them randomly in the internet. And it's cool to see the impact that your stuff have in people's life. And you don't think about that when you do the podcast. Oh, some people, because I'm from Cyprus, some people randomly in the other side of the world is listening, is applying this stuff. Where will this lead, and like how much snowball effect will have impact to the civilization? You don't know. So it's very beautiful to see that. And also I want you to promise me that because we left a lot of topics uncovered, in the future, maybe 3-4 months from now, we're going to do another podcast and we're going to get more deep into the AI.
Happy to do that. Yeah, absolutely. Could do that.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I love you. Thank you for your time, guys. Subscribe to this. Go and buy his book. I put the link in the description. And I want to say a huge thank you. And I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great time. Yeah. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Let me just say, here's a quote. So from a Chinese philosopher, he said probably better than I could, a good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent on arriving.